single forbidden line could save an entire people or shatter their world forever. Elara, a young elven apprentice, knows this as her hand trembles, sketching a hidden geometric pattern onto a blade mold. This act of defiance breaks 1,000 years of tradition, but she seeks to rediscover a lost art, the only thing that might save her fading people. Her choice immediately draws the stern gaze of the master forger, setting her on a dangerous path where the very soul of her craft is at stake. By the end of her journey, you will understand the profound connection between geometric perfection and the spirit of creation itself, what ancient secrets lie within these forgotten patterns, and what price must be paid to wield them. Where are you listening from right now, and what is the local time where you are? What would you risk to bring back something truly beautiful, something the world has forgotten? The sharp crack of shattering steel echoed through the forge, a sound far more final than any bell. Master Kalan stood over the fragments of Elara's blade, his face a mask of cold disappointment. He did not shout. His quiet command for her to surrender her tools and begin scrubbing the soot from the workshop floors was far worse. This was not merely a punishment, it was an unmasking. In a single, public act, he severed her connection to the forge's heart, reducing her from an apprentice to a menial laborer. The other smiths turned away, their silence a wall of judgment. She had broken tradition, and in their eyes, she was broken herself. The Enclave's unity, she saw now, was a fragile thing, built upon an unyielding obedience to forms unchanged for centuries. Her geometric deviation was not seen as innovation, but as a dangerous flaw. Each scrape of her brush against the stone floor fueled a turmoil within her. Was the master right? Had her trembling hand created not a new harmony, but a true dissonance, a crack in the very soul of the craft she loved? The doubt was a heavy chain, but the memory of her fading people's need was a sharper goad. That night, while the Enclave slept, a different kind of fire ignited within her. Rebellion, she decided, would be her new teacher. She would not submit. By the pale light of the moon, filtering through a high window, she retrieved a hidden, leather-bound journal. The risk was immense. Discovery meant permanent exile, but her secret research was now the only thread connecting her to her purpose. Her fingers traced the faded script of an old text, salvaged from a discarded pile, its pages whispering of a hidden library, a sanctuary for knowledge that tradition had chosen to forget. The air in the sealed archive was thick with the scent of aged parchment and forgotten promises. Elara moved like a ghost herself, the stolen key cold in her palm, her heart hammering a rhythm that seemed loud enough to wake the very stones. Dust motes danced in the slivers of moonlight, illuminating towering shelves crammed with scrolls whose languages were lost to time. Her fingers trembled not from fear, but from a desperate hope as she unrolled brittle texts, scanning for any mention of the hidden geometry. She found it not in a grand treatise, but in fragmented margins, whispered notes about an event called the Great Conjunction. It was not just a meeting of stars, the text suggested, but a celestial alignment that once opened a channel for the purest form of celestial energy, a power the ancient smiths harnessed to breathe life into their greatest creations. A soft, chime-like hum filled the air, and the temperature dropped sharply. She had triggered the archive's magical wards. From the shadows between shelves, spectral forms began to coalesce, their eyes glowing with pale blue light. These were the Guardians, ethereal sentinels bound to protect the Enclave's secrets. Elara's breath caught. This was no longer a quiet search, it was a hunt. She dropped low, using the massive scroll racks for cover, her every sense stretched to its limit. The Guardians drifted silently, their presence a cold pressure against her skin. One passed so close, she could see the intricate patterns of its fading form. In that moment of sheer terror, her resolve hardened. She would not be caught empty-handed. Her eyes fell upon a specific scroll, its casing marked with a familiar, complex geometric seal. It was the source. As a guardian turned its head slowly, scanning the aisle, she made her choice. Stealing the original would be discovered instantly. Instead, with a piece of charcoal and a scrap of hide from her pocket, she pressed a frantic copy of the central diagram, a beautiful, maddeningly complex web of lines and angles that seemed to map the stars themselves. The charcoal dusted her fingers as she worked, a ticking clock in the silence. She had just rolled the original back into place and slipped the copy into her tunic when a guardian's head snapped toward her hiding spot. She froze, but it was already moving on, drawn to some other disturbance. The immediate danger had passed, but the deeper consequence was now unavoidable. The activated wards were a silent alarm. The elders would soon know their most sacred repository had been violated. Slipping back into the night, the copied diagram felt like a live ember against her skin. She could not decipher its celestial code alone. Its language was one of advanced astronomy and arcane mathematics, subjects frowned upon in the modern Enclave. The secret was now in her hands, but it was locked away, useless. She needed a key, someone who saw the world not through tradition, but through the raw lens of cosmic patterns. This realization led her to a dangerous, almost unthinkable conclusion. To understand the geometry of her ancestors, she would have to seek help from beyond the forest, from one the elders called an outsider. The human village smelled of wood smoke and damp earth, a stark contrast to the living, perfumed air of the elven woods. Elara kept her hood drawn low, feeling every gaze upon her as an accusation. Orion's dwelling was a crooked tower of stone and timber, perched on the edge of the wilds, its roof crowned with a tarnished brass telescope. He answered her hesitant knock with a wary expression, his eyes sharp with an intelligence that missed nothing. He was a man who measured the universe, and he measured her in a single glance. She saw no hatred in his face, only a profound and guarded solitude. He had no reason to trust an elf any more than her people had to trust a human. Her plea felt clumsy on her tongue, the words of a desperate child. But when she mentioned the Great Conjunction, his demeanor shifted. She had not come to him with elven superiority, but with a question that touched upon his own life's work. She offered the only currency she had left, her steady hands and knowledge of preserving inks and fragile materials, to mend his collection of crumbling, priceless star charts. It was a humble bargain, a craftsman's offer, and he accepted. Inside, surrounded by charts and complex orreries, the true nature of the diagram unfolded. Orion's fingers, stained with ink, traced the copied lines with a reverence her master would never have shown. "This is not merely a pattern," he murmured, his voice filled with the quiet awe of discovery. "It is a clock, The geometry is a key, but the lock is time itself. He explained that the lines did not just represent the positions of stars, but their precise alignment at a specific moment, a celestial trigger. The Great Conjunction was not a distant myth. It was a calculable event, and its apex was only a handful of nights away. The energy it would focus was not a vague power. It was a specific, resonant frequency that the ancient elves had learned to capture and weave into metal. To forge a blade with this geometry at any other time would be like trying to ring a bell with a feather. The design and the event were one single, inseparable act of creation. This revelation forced Elara to confront a deep-seated prejudice. The elders spoke of humans as chaotic, short-sighted beings, incapable of understanding the long, slow rhythms of the world. Yet here was a man who had dedicated his life to mapping the grandest rhythm of all. Her trust could not be partial, it had to be absolute. Taking a breath that felt like stepping off a cliff, she told him everything. She spoke of her fading people, the stifling rigidity of the Enclave, the shattered blade, and her desperate belief that this lost art was their only hope for renewal. She laid her entire quest and her people's potential future at the feet of an outsider. In that moment, the fragile alliance solidified into a true partnership, sealed by a shared secret that now placed them both in grave danger. For an elf to conspire with a human was not just a breach of protocol, it was a betrayal of identity in the eyes of her kin. Discovery meant being cast out forever, severed from the only home she had ever known. Orion's calculations gave them a destination. The conjunction's energy would not fall evenly upon the land, he explained. It would pool, like water in a basin, at a specific point of telluric resonance. His charts and astrological tables pointed to a place the elves had long considered barren and forsaken, a grove where the stones held a silent, waiting charge. They would have to travel quickly and in secret, reaching that forgotten ground before the stars completed their ancient dance. The race was no longer just against tradition, but against the heavens themselves. The Whispering Grove was a cathedral of silence. Ancient trees stood like pillars, their bark etched with runes of a language even older than the elves. Every leaf was still, as if the entire forest was holding its breath. Orion hesitated at the edge, his human senses recoiling from the palpable weight of age and magic. Then the ground trembled. A massive form of gnarled wood and moss disentangled itself from the surrounding trunks, its eyes glowing with the deep, patient light of centuries. This was the Guardian, a treant of unimaginable age, and its voice was the sound of roots shifting deep beneath the earth. It did not threaten them with violence, but with a profound and territorial presence. This was its sanctuary, and they were an intrusion. Elara stepped forward, her heart pounding, and offered a formal greeting in the old tongue, a language of respect her people had all but forgotten. The treant's gaze fixed upon her, and it spoke not a command, but a riddle. It asked of the balance between the maker and the made. It wanted to know how one could pour the fire of creation into a vessel without being consumed by its forge. The question struck at the very heart of her failed blade and her entire quest. She thought of Master Kalan's rigid forms, a creation without sacrifice, and of her own shattered work, an attempt at sacrifice without understanding. The answer came to her not as a thought, but as a feeling, a truth she had always known. She looked at the ancient tree, at the carpet of its own fallen leaves, nourishing the soil, and she understood. True creation, she replied, requires a piece of the Creator's own spirit. It is not a loss, but a sowing. The fire does not consume the smith, it forges them both. The blade and the soul are tempered as one. The treant was silent for a long moment, the forest itself seeming to listen. Then, with a slow, deliberate nod, it stepped aside. Its weary voice held a note of grim approval. The path is open, child of the leaf, but know that the old ones are watching. Their passage was granted, but the victory felt solemn. They had not tricked a simple beast, they had satisfied a judge. The heart of the grove opened before them, a circular clearing where the air shimmered with a tangible energy. And there, at the very center, resting on a pedestal of living rock, was a crystal. It was perfectly clear, yet it held a captured light within, a soft hum resonating from its core that harmonized with the coming alignment of the stars. This was no mere mineral, it was a focus, a vessel waiting to be filled with the power of the Great Conjunction, the perfect heart for a blade, meant to sing with the music of the spheres. The crystal hummed in Elara's palm, a captured star resting against her skin. Under the cold light of the moon, she laid out her hidden tools and a small, pure ingot of silver. This was not the final blade, only a test, a single note to see if she could still the song of the spheres. With the crystal as a focusing lens, she channeled the ambient moonlight, her hand moving with a precision born of desperation to inscribe a simple, foundational geometric pattern onto the metal. For a breathtaking moment, it worked. The silver ignited from within, glowing with a soft, harmonious light that pulsed in time with the crystal's hum. It was beautiful, a fleeting echo of the power she sought. Then, just as quickly, the light guttered and faded, leaving the ingot dull and inert once more. The silence that followed was louder than any shattering steel. Her theory was correct, yet the result was a profound failure. The geometry was a key, and the celestial energy was the lock, but she had failed to turn it. The missing component was now agonizingly clear. The treant's riddle echoed in her mind. How could one pour the fire of creation into a vessel without being consumed by its forge? She had treated the spirit as an abstract idea, a philosophical concept, but the quick fade of the light proved it was something far more tangible. The peace of the Creator had to be a deliberate, conscious sacrifice, a tangible offering of one's own essence, willingly given to the work. This realization tightened the knot of tension in her chest. The Great Conjunction was rushing closer with each passing night, and the margin for error was not just small, it was non-existent. The next attempt would demand everything, and it had to be perfect. There could be no more prototypes, no more half-understood truths. To understand what she must truly sacrifice, she needed to look into the very soul of her craft. This failure, this glimpse of fleeting light, drove her toward the Enclave's most sacred and dangerous place, the memory pool, where the echoes of every smith who had ever forged there were said to linger. The memory pool was not water, but liquid time. Its surface, a perfect mirror in the heart of a cavern, did not reflect Elara's anxious face, only the darkness of the vaulted stone above. To step into it was to step out of herself. The cold was not of temperature, but of centuries. As she submerged, the world dissolved into a torrent of sensation that was not her own. The memory seized her not as a vision, but as a life lived in a single, wrenching moment. She was Lorel, a master forger from an age when the stars were closer. Her people were besieged, not by a fading magic, but by a tangible darkness that clawed at the edges of their world. The geometric key was complete, the celestial alignment perfect, but the blade in her hands remained dormant, a beautiful, silent corpse of metal. The memory's despair was a physical weight, and Elara felt it as her own. Then came the understanding, not as a thought, but as a visceral certainty that bypassed the mind and spoke directly to the spirit. The final component was not an incantation or a more perfect line. It was a choice. In the memory, Lorel made it. She did not chant or gesture. She simply opened herself, focusing every ounce of her joy, her hope, her love for her people, and channeled it, not around the blade, but directly into its crystalline heart. It was not a transfer of power, but a severing. Elara felt a part of Lorel's own life force tear away, a brilliant, painful unraveling that left a permanent hollow in its wake. The blade ignited, not with borrowed light, but with an inner fire that was now its own, a shard of the smith's soul given permanent form. The memory ended with a gasp as Elara broke the surface of the pool, choking on air that felt too thin. She was back in her own body, but it felt alien, fragile. The ritual had not been a lesson observed, but a wound experienced. She had not just learned about sacrifice, she had felt its exact cost, the precise sensation of a spirit being willingly diminished to give something else a true and lasting life. She dragged herself from the pool's edge, her limbs heavy, her spirit feeling thin and translucent. The hollow echo of Lorel's sacrifice now resided within her, a shared emptiness. But from that void bloomed a terrifying clarity. There was no other way. The secret was not a technique, but a transaction. To create something that truly lived, one had to give it a piece of one's own life. Stumbling back into the moonlight, her body was weakened, but her resolve was an unbreakable core of iron. She knew the price, and she was willing to pay it. Every slow, aching step back toward Orion's tower was a confirmation. She carried the final, terrible piece of the puzzle, and the Great Conjunction's final hours were now ticking down. The Decree of Banishment fell not like a hammer, but like a final, sealing stone. Master Kalan's voice held no anger before the assembled Elder Council, only a cold, profound finality. Elara was stripped of her status, her name struck from the rolls, her connection to the Enclave severed with the impersonal efficiency of a surgeon removing a diseased limb. The faces she had known since childhood were now a wall of impassive judgment. She felt the rupture not as a shout, but as a silence, a sudden, chilling emptiness where the hum of her people's shared spirit had once been. This was the cost, laid bare. She could have fallen to her knees, could have begged for a forgiveness that would never come, but the hollow echo of Lorel's sacrifice within her own soul was a stronger foundation than any community's approval. She met the master's gaze and accepted the decree with a quiet nod, a gesture of such calm resolve that it seemed to disturb the elders more than any protest would have. In that moment, she was no longer an apprentice. She was a force of nature, set irrevocably upon her path. Exile was a cold wind against a skin that had never known it. Every familiar tree, every mossy stone path, now belonged to a world that had cast her out. The internal conflict was a sharp ache, a longing for the warmth and safety of the only home she had ever known. Was her quest worth this absolute loss? The question echoed in the new silence around her, but the memory of the memory pool's chilling truth provided the only answer that mattered. It had to be. There was no going back, for the path behind her had crumbled into nothing. Her resolve, instead of shattering, crystallized into something harder and sharper than any steel she had ever worked. With nothing left to lose, every risk was now permissible. Orion found her at the edge of the human lands, the gathering storm clouds mirroring the tumult in her eyes. He asked no questions, his silent presence the only solidarity she needed. They worked quickly, their movements efficient under the darkening sky. He provided the final, purified metals, alloys he had refined through his own understanding of celestial correspondences. She prepared the forge site at the telluric focal point he had calculated, a secluded clearing where the very air was beginning to crackle with potential. The wind picked up, whipping the trees into a frenzy as the first distant rumble of thunder rolled across the land. The sky itself was a coiled spring, the atmosphere thick with the impending release of the Great Conjunction. There would be no second chance, no opportunity to learn from another failure. Everything, from the purity of the metal to the precision of the geometry and the totality of her sacrifice, had to be perfect. The storm was not a barrier, it was the overture. The clearing in the Whispering Grove became a crucible of focused chaos. With the Great Conjunction's approach humming in the very air, Elara and Orion worked with a frantic harmony, building a forge not of brick and mortar, but of intent and necessity. They aligned stones along the invisible geomantic ley lines Orion's charts had revealed, creating a channel for the Earth's own power to amplify the coming celestial fire. The result was a ring of standing stones surrounding a central fire pit, a stark, primal contrast to the Enclave's polished forges. As Orion lit the kindling with a focused lens, the flames did not simply rise, they roared to life with an unnatural, blue-white intensity, pulling energy directly from the land itself. They had their forge, a masterpiece of desperate ingenuity, but such a blatant draw of power could not go unnoticed. From the surrounding gloom, corrupted forest spirits began to coalesce. These were not the ancient, noble guardians like the Treant, but twisted, ethereal things drawn to the raw energy like moths to a flame. Their forms flickered at the edge of the stone circle, hissing with a sound like tearing silk, their touch promising to snuff the forge's fire and freeze the very metal. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. She could not stop her work to fight, and Orion's human strength was useless against these phantoms. The ritual and their defense were now two sides of the same, impossible task. Her mind raced, sifting through the geometric patterns she had studied. There was no time for a complex ritual, only for application. Snatching a piece of charcoal, she dropped to her knees and sketched a swift, interlocking ward in the soil at the circle's perimeter. It was a simple pattern of deflection, a theory she had never tested. As she completed the final line, the diagram glowed with a soft, silver light. The next spirit to lunge forward recoiled with a shriek, repelled by an invisible barrier. It worked. Her geometry was not just a key for creation, but a shield. She had successfully applied her theory in a moment of dire need, holding the snarling spirits at bay. Yet the victory was costly. Maintaining the ward's integrity required a constant, subtle drain on her own spirit, a slow leak from a well that was already perilously low after her ordeal in the memory pool. Each snarl from the darkness made her flinch. Each flicker of the protective field cost her a breath. She was defending their future with the dregs of her present strength. Then, as the last vestiges of twilight bled from the sky, the first brilliant stars of the Great Conjunction pierced the darkness overhead. Their appearance was a signal, a cosmic starting gun. The final, most dangerous phase of the forging was upon them, and Elara had never felt more exhausted or more determined. The first true starlight of the Great Conjunction struck the crystal focus, and the world turned to silver. A torrent of raw celestial power flooded the clearing, channeling through Elara's body. It was not a gentle flow, but a river of lightning, searing her nerves and filling her mind with the deafening music of spinning galaxies. Her hammer fell upon the white-hot metal, each strike guided by a geometry her hand now understood on an instinctual level. She was no longer just forging a blade. She was weaving a constellation into solid form, her movements a desperate, beautiful dance against the dying of her own light. With every precise impact, a part of her own vitality flowed down her arm and into the emerging weapon. The blade began to glow with a steady, brilliant luminescence, a light that did not flicker but held firm, a captured piece of the starry sky. But this perfection came at a direct and agonizing cost. A cold emptiness spread from her core, a hollowing out that was far worse than any physical pain. Each breath became a struggle, each heartbeat a fainter echo. Her vision blurred at the edges, the world narrowing to the glowing metal and the geometric pattern she had to complete. This was the Treant's riddle made real, the terrifying balance between creation and consumption. A primal instinct for survival screamed at her to stop, to pull back the last shreds of her essence and save herself. The desire to live was a powerful, magnetic force, urging her to drop the hammer and simply breathe. But the memory of Lorelle's sacrifice, now a part of her own soul, was stronger. She saw the fading faces of her people, the rigid despair of the Enclave, the silent hope in Orion's eyes. Her commitment was not to an idea, but to a future. In that final, defining moment, she made her choice. Instead of resisting the drain, she embraced it. She consciously opened the last gates of her spirit and pushed, pouring not just the required energy, but every remaining ounce of her hope, her will, her very self into the blade. It was a final, willing gift. The result was instantaneous and absolute. The blade erupted with a light so pure and permanent, it seemed to etch itself into the air, humming with a self-sustaining song of power. It was alive, truly and completely, and as the last of her strength left her body, Elara collapsed, the world going dark and silent around her. The forge fire guttered out, its purpose fulfilled. The only light left in the clearing came from the finished blade, pulsing softly on the anvil, and the still form of the elf who had given it life. Orion rushed to her side, his calculations forgotten, his hands hovering over her unnervingly still form. The fate of the creation and the creator were now one, bound by a sacrifice that had left one perfected and the other perilously close to extinction. A soft, rhythmic pulse began to emanate from the blade, a gentle counterbeat to Elara's faltering heart. Orion, his own hands trembling, saw the light within the metal thrum with a strange, anxious energy. Without a conscious thought, driven by a desperation that eclipsed all reason, he lifted Elara's limp hand and pressed her palm against the weapon's warm hilt. The reaction was immediate and profound. The brilliant light did not flare outwards, but turned inward, flowing up her arm like liquid silver. It was not the violent torrent of the conjunction, but a quiet, deliberate stream, a conscious act of return. The blade, recognizing the unique signature of the spirit that had given it form, was giving a part of itself back. Color slowly returned to Elara's cheeks, and a ragged, shuddering breath filled her lungs. She awoke not to confusion, but to a new, impossible awareness. She could feel the blade's presence in her mind, not as a voice, but as a quiet hum of intent, a companion consciousness born from starlight and sacrifice. It was not a tool waiting for a command. It was a partner waiting for a decision. The ancient texts had never spoken of this. A sentient artifact was a paradox, a creation that now possessed its own will. Could it truly be commanded, or would it demand to be consulted? The safety of her people might now depend on a negotiation with an entity that had never existed before this very night. Looking at the weapon resting beside her, its light dimmed but steady, Elara understood the only choice she could make. She would not claim ownership over this new life. She accepted the connection, not as a master to a servant, but as one soul acknowledging another. This was the true, uncharted territory of the old ways, a symbiotic relationship between creator and creation that redefined the very soul of elven craft. But this beautiful, fragile bond had already sent out a beacon. As Elara's strength solidified, a new chill swept through the clearing. The corrupted spirits they had held at bay were returning, no longer drawn just to the forge's energy, but now covetously focused on the immense power radiating from the living blade itself. Their whispers coalesced into a single, hungry thought at the edge of perception, and the shadows around the stone circle began to thicken and advance. The shadows did not creep, they lunged. A tide of twisted spirits surged into the clearing, their forms a blur of gnashing teeth and grasping claws, drawn by the living blade's radiant song. Elara's body screamed in protest, every muscle leaden from her sacrifice, but her spirit was now fused with a will of celestial steel. She met the first attacker, not with a wild swing, but with a thought. The blade in her hand flared, and a geometric shield of hard light materialized in the air before her, deflecting the spirit's corrosive touch with a resonant chime. Orion fought beside her with a heavy staff, his human strength a fragile barrier against the spectral onslaught, but he was a rock against which she could anchor her desperate defense. They were an island in a storm of malice, and they were being worn down. The sheer number of foes was overwhelming, a relentless, exhausting pressure. A single misstep, a moment of lost focus on the geometric patterns flashing in her mind, and the shield would fail. They could not win through force alone. As she parried another strike, Elara saw past the corruption, glimpsing the pained, trapped essence within each spirit. They were not monsters, but wounded things, twisted by a hunger for the very light her blade now embodied. A new understanding crystallized within her. To fight them with the intent to destroy would be a betrayal of the creation she had just brought into the world. The blade was born from sacrifice and hope, not from a desire to dominate. Her purpose shifted in an instant. She would not cut them down, she would set them free. Channeling the blade's energy once more, she did not form a shield. Instead, she focused its light into a precise, cutting beam of pure harmony. When the next spirit lunged, she did not block it, but let the beam wash over it. The result was not an explosion, but a release. The corrupting darkness unraveled like old thread, and the spirit within, now cleansed, shimmered for a moment in a form of serene, ancient wood and leaf, before dissolving into motes of gentle light. It was an act of profound mercy that demanded everything from her. Each purification was a massive drain, sapping the little strength she had regained, forcing her to draw more and more from the fragile bond she shared with the blade. She was healing the forest with her own life, one spirit at a time. Orion adapted instantly, his defense becoming a strategic funnel, guiding the corrupted beings toward her cleansing light. The battle was a brutal symphony of desperation and grace, a dance on the edge of a knife. Finally, as the last spirit was purified and faded into peace, an unearthly silence fell. The grove was still, but the air itself seemed to sigh in relief, the very stones humming with a restored balance. The profound peace was their victory, but it was also their exposure. The immense release of harmonizing power had rippled outwards from this place, a clarion call of renewed magic that would not, could not, go unnoticed by the sensitive elders of the Enclave. The profound peace of the grove was a fragile bubble, and it was about to be pierced. Elara and Orion did not slink back to the Elven Enclave through hidden paths. They walked openly through the main gate, the living blade resting across Elara's open palms. Its soft, constant light was a silent challenge to the perpetual twilight of tradition. Their arrival was not a return, it was an event. A ripple of shock spread through the serene walkways, apprentices dropping their tools, masters halting mid-sentence, all drawn by the undeniable radiance of the impossible. The uproar was not loud, but deep, a tremor in the very foundation of their shared belief. They were brought directly to the grand hall, where the full council of elders waited, their faces carved from the same stone as their thrones. Master Kalan stood at the center, his expression a rigid mask, but his eyes betrayed a storm of conflict. He saw the blade, felt its sentient hum resonating in the air, a living contradiction to everything he had taught. "You were cast out," he stated, his voice cold and flat. "You return with a human and a forbidden artifact. You have broken every law of this enclave." The air was thick with judgment, a wall of tradition built over centuries. The other elders murmured their agreement, their fear of the new warring with their awe of the object before them. Elara met his gaze, her own spirit calm within the hollow space left by her sacrifice. "I do not ask for reinstatement," she said, her voice clear and carrying through the tense silence. "I offer you this." She held the blade out, not as a weapon, but as a gift. "Study it, learn from it. The geometry it holds is not a heresy, it is our forgotten birthright. This is not my victory, it is a possibility for all of us." Her request was the most dangerous kind of rebellion, one that asked not for destruction, but for evolution. It forced the elders to confront their own rigid doctrines, to weigh their pride against the potential salvation of their entire craft. The future of elven forging hung in that moment, balanced on a knife's edge. Could these masters, bound by 1,000 years of unchanging practice, humble themselves before a creation born from exile and human collaboration? The silence stretched, taut and suffocating. Then, as the elders debated in hushed, frantic tones, the blade itself intervened. It began to hum more loudly, a gentle, insistent frequency. Beams of light, crisp and perfect, emanated from its core, projecting the very geometric patterns of its creation onto the high, curved walls of the hall. Stars, angles, and interlocking lines danced around them, a silent, beautiful argument written in light, a language of creation that predated all their laws. The elders fell silent, staring at the luminous proof now surrounding them. The geometric light show did not fade from the council hall walls for hours. The elders moved in a hushed, almost reverent silence, their hands tracing the glowing lines in the air, their instruments taking readings of the blade's impossible resonance. They tested its edge against enchanted alloys that no modern blade could scratch, and watched as it cut through with a clean, singing sound. They attempted to commune with its spirit, a process that left the most hardened masters looking shaken and deeply moved. The evidence was not just compelling, it was absolute. This single creation was a masterpiece beyond any forged in centuries. Its perfection, a silent, damning critique of their entire tradition. Yet its nature was not domineering or chaotic, but profoundly harmonious, a quality their own strict methods had failed to produce. The council fractured along a new, painful line. Some elders, their eyes alight with a long-forgotten wonder, saw not a crime, but a rediscovery. They argued that to reject this was to choose stagnation over their own survival. Others, their faces tight with fear, saw only the broken laws, the human collaborator, the exile who had defied them. They warned that accepting this path would unravel the very fabric of their society, rewarding anarchy over order. The debate raged, and at its center stood Master Kalan, a statue of internal conflict. He watched the blade's gentle, self-sustaining light, a light born from the very apprentice he had cast out. He had dedicated his life to preserving a legacy, and now that legacy was being rewritten before his eyes. To agree was to admit his entire life's work was incomplete, that his judgment of Elara had been a catastrophic error. To deny was to willfully blind himself and his people to their only hope. The weight of his authority had never felt heavier. Finally, he lifted a hand, and the hall fell silent. His voice was low, stripped of its usual certainty, but firm. "We have preserved the forms, but we have lost the fire that gave them meaning," he said. "This blade is not a rebellion. It is a remembrance. I cast my vote to accept this knowledge." His decision was the turning point. The Enclave's ancient laws were officially amended, the forbidden geometry lifted from the shadows and brought into the light of the forges. Yet the victory was not clean. A significant faction of traditionalists, led by a stern elder named Morwen, refused to accept the verdict. They did not storm out, but their silence was a colder, more dangerous thing than any shouted protest. They represented a deep-seated fear that would not be easily swayed. With the path forward cleared by Kalan's painful courage, a new and monumental responsibility fell upon Elara. She was not just pardoned, she was tasked with establishing a new school, charged with teaching her methods to the next generation of smiths. The one who had been an outcast was now the architect of the future, a future balanced precariously between a brilliant new dawn and the simmering resentment of the old guard. The silence in Elara's new forge was a different kind of pressure, A small group of apprentices stood before her, their expressions a mix of curiosity and deep-seated skepticism. These were the first volunteers, the brave few willing to risk the elder's disapproval. Her own hands felt empty without a hammer, her authority as fragile as glass. She was not a master forged by centuries of tradition. She was an exile with a living blade, and every doubting glance was a reminder. She began not with a complex diagram, but with a single, resonant note from a tuning fork. "Listen," she said, her voice softer than she intended. "This is not about lines on a page. It is about finding this same harmony between your spirit and the metal." The first exercises were simple, almost childish. She had them trace basic harmonic patterns in sand, not with their hands, but with their focused intent, feeling for the subtle pull of resonance in the air itself. The initial attempts were clumsy. Fingers trembled, the sand patterns smeared, and frustrated sighs were common. A young elf named Phelan, known for his rigid adherence to the old forms, scowled at his messy lines. "This is a waste of time," he muttered, a sentiment echoed in the stiff postures of the watchers sent by Elder Morwen. Elara's heart sank, the old insecurity rising like a tide. But then she looked at Phelan, not as a critic, but as a student trapped in a cage of rules. She knelt beside him. "Do not think of it as drawing a line," she said gently. "Think of it as offering a path for the light to follow. Your intent is the guide, not your hand." She shared a fragment of her own memory from the Whispering Grove, the feeling of the crystal's hum aligning with her own hope. She made it personal. Something shifted in Phelan's eyes. The scowl softened into concentration. On his next attempt, his hand moved with a new kind of certainty. He was not just copying a shape, he was asking a question of the universe, and the universe answered. A flicker of soft, silver light, no bigger than a firefly, sparked within the small copper sample he was working with. It glowed for a single, breathtaking second before fading. The forge fell utterly silent. Then, a collective gasp broke the stillness. The flicker was tiny, a mere echo of what Elara had achieved, but it was real. It was proof. Phelan stared at his hands, his earlier skepticism replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated wonder. A wide, disbelieving smile spread across his face, and the joy was so palpable, it seemed to warm the very air. The other apprentices crowded around, their doubts momentarily forgotten, their voices a hopeful clamor. They had seen it with their own eyes. The geometry was not a myth, it was a skill that could be learned. Word of that single, flickering light traveled through the Enclave faster than any official decree. The next morning, Elara found her forge was no longer a quiet, hesitant classroom. A crowd of new faces, dozens of apprentices, their eyes alight with a hunger she recognized from her own past, waited for her at the entrance. The first lesson had been a success, but the real test was only beginning. That first spark of student success was a fire that spread too fast for some to bear. Phelan, the very apprentice who had first channeled the light, now saw its proliferation not as a miracle, but as a plague. His initial wonder had curdled into a bitter conviction, fueled by the whispered fears of Elder Morwen and her traditionalists. They saw the new forges not as places of learning, but of sacrilege, where the sacred, solitary bond between smith and metal was being corrupted by shared secrets and human-influenced geometries. His charisma, once used to master old forms, now rallied a group of followers who believed the sentient blade was an abomination, a perversion of nature that had to be severed from its creator to restore balance. They moved under the cover of a moonless night, their steps silent on the familiar paths. Orion, whose human senses were attuned to the Enclave's subtle disharmonies, was the first to notice the shift. A faint scuff near Elara's private chamber, a shadow that moved with purpose rather than the gentle drift of an elf. He gave the alarm, but Phelan was already inside, his hand outstretched toward the softly glowing blade. The weapon did not need a protector. As Phelan's fingers neared the hilt, its light flared into a silent, concussive wave of pure force that threw him back against the wall. It was not an attack, but a profound and simple refusal. The blade would not be taken. The failed theft shattered the last pretense of civility. Phelan's humiliation turned to rage, and his followers emerged from the shadows, their own traditional weapons drawn. They faced Orion and a handful of Elara's loyal students, who stood guard with tools and newly forged, but untested, geometric wards. The grand courtyard, once a place of serene contemplation, became a battleground. The conflict was no longer ideological. It was visceral, elf against elf, a brutal rending of the community's heart. Elara arrived to the sickening sound of clashing steel and cries of pain. Her command cut through the chaos, not with anger, but with a sorrow that stilled her students. "Stand down. Do not raise your hands against our own." She walked into the center of the fray, the sentient blade now humming in her hand. But she did not point it at anyone. Instead, she drove its tip into the stone at her feet. A ring of brilliant, harmonious light erupted from the point of impact, a towering, cylindrical wall that expanded outward, gently but irresistibly pushing the combatants apart. It was a barrier of pure creation, not destruction. Those who touched it felt not pain, but a calming resonance, a forcible peace that drained the anger from their limbs. The fighting ceased, replaced by a stunned silence. The immediate violence was over, but the deeper wound was now exposed for all to see. Phelan and his followers, disarmed and isolated within the fading light of the barrier, were subdued. Yet their defiant, terrified stares were a more powerful weapon than any sword. They were not evil, they were genuinely afraid, convinced that Elara's path led to ruin. This violent fracture proved that knowledge alone was not enough. It could be a source of terrible division as easily as it was a font of unity. The threat was no longer just fading magic, but an internal civil war, a community tearing itself in two over the very thing meant to save it. In the tense quiet that followed, Elara looked at Phelan, not as a traitor, but as a symptom of her own failure. She had taught the geometry of the stars, but she had failed to address the fear in their hearts. The cold stone of the detention chamber smelled of damp moss and despair. Elara found Phelan seated on a simple bench, his back to the door, his posture radiating a bitterness that seemed to chill the air. He did not look at her as she entered. "I did not come for an apology," she said, her voice quiet in the small space. "I came to understand." For a long moment, there was only the sound of their breathing. Then he spoke, his words low and sharp. "You think you are a revolutionary, but you are just repeating history's mistakes. My master, Kalan, was the most brilliant smith of his generation. He, too, sought to revive the old ways. He spoke of geometry, of celestial alignments. His voice cracked, the memory raw even after decades. He poured his soul into a blade, just as you did. And when it failed, it did not simply shatter. It consumed him. The backlash of energy did not just break his body, it unraveled his mind, leaving him a hollow shell who never spoke another word. That is the true face of your forgotten art. It is not salvation. It is a predator that devours its creators. Elara felt his grief like a physical blow, a tragic echo of her own fears in the memory pool. She saw the terrified boy he had been, watching his hero destroyed by the very magic he now championed. His hatred was not born of malice, but of a deep, protective love for the craft and its practitioners. She knelt, bringing herself to his eye level. "I am so sorry, Phelan. That is a loss I cannot fathom." But Kalan's tragedy was not caused by the geometry itself. It was caused by its isolation. He worked alone, his knowledge fragmented, his methods untested. He had no one to share the burden, no one to catch him if he fell. My path is different because it is built on collaboration, not solitary genius. The old ways were lost because we stopped talking to each other, because we let fear wall off knowledge. We are not meant to do this alone. Phelan finally turned to look at her, his eyes red-rimmed. "So you would have me betray his memory, embrace the thing that killed him?" "No," she said, her gaze steady. "I am asking you to honor it. I am asking you to help me ensure no other apprentice ever has to watch their master break. I am not asking you to become my student. I want you to be the keeper of the old ways, the guardian of every technique and tradition that brought us to this point. We cannot move forward if we forget where we came from. Your knowledge is not obsolete, Phelan. It is the essential foundation upon which we must build." The risk was immense. This man had tried to steal her blade, had rallied others to violence against her. Trusting him was a leap of faith that could shatter everything she was trying to build. But she saw that the only way to truly heal the Enclave was not to defeat the Traditionalists, but to integrate them, to show their value was not diminished, but transformed. Phelan studied her face, searching for any hint of deception. He saw only a profound and weary sincerity, a leader who understood that unity was more powerful than victory. The rigid anger in his shoulders slowly eased. He gave a single, slow nod. "I will do it. Not for you, for him, for all of us." It was a fragile thread of reconciliation, but it was the first one woven back into the torn fabric of their community. With his acceptance, the work of building a unified future could truly begin, a future where the wisdom of the past was not a chain, but a compass. The design room became a crucible of clashing philosophies. Elara's diagrams of celestial resonance lay scattered across the table, intersecting with Phelan's meticulous scrolls of traditional quenching techniques and Master Kalan's authoritative charts on alloy purity. The air was thick not with agreement, but with the friction of three brilliant minds learning a new language. Phelan would point to a geometric sequence, his finger tapping a specific angle. This line creates a harmonic instability. If quenched in the northern spring, he would insist, his voice tight. The old texts are clear. We must adjust the tempering cycle. Elara, who had once defied all tradition, now listened with genuine humility. She would lean in, studying his references, and often concede, "You are right. My calculations did not account for the seasonal dampness. Let us use your method." Her deference was a deliberate choice, a quiet signal that this new path was not about her victory, but about their collective wisdom. Master Kalan, in turn, found himself mediating, his own deep-seated beliefs challenged by the raw potential in Elara's work. He would propose a metal blend thought obsolete, and she would demonstrate how its crystalline structure perfectly aligned with a specific stellar frequency. Each decision was a negotiation, a small bridge built over a chasm of suspicion. The first collaborative blade was born from this tense, beautiful struggle. Its creation was a symphony of alternating leadership. Phelan oversaw the initial folding of the steel, his hands moving with an ancient, unerring rhythm. Elara then guided the inscription of the core geometric pattern, her voice soft as she explained the flow of intent to the watching apprentices. Finally, Master Kalan himself presided over the final quench, choosing a traditional oil infusion that he swore would seal the blade's spirit to the physical world. When the finished weapon was lifted from the mist, a collective breath was held. It was not as blindingly luminous as Elara's sentient blade, nor as starkly perfect as a purely traditional masterwork. It held a different beauty. Its edge shimmered with a subtle, internal light that pulsed in a slow, steady rhythm, like a heartbeat. Along its spine, the elegant, organic flow of traditional Elven scrollwork seamlessly integrated with the sharper, more precise geometric inlays. It was a dialogue made metal, powerful yet profoundly respectful, a child of two worlds. The blade's balanced perfection was the ultimate argument. It proved that evolution did not require annihilation, that the soul of the craft could be preserved even as its body was transformed. This single object became the symbol of their fragile new era, a tangible answer to the fear that had nearly torn them apart. Word of the synthesis blade, a masterpiece forged by the union of outcast, traditionalist, and master, did not remain within the forest for long. Its fame, carried on the whispers of traders and travelers, began to ripple out across the distant Elven kingdoms, stirring interest in courts that had long considered the Enclave a relic of a forgotten age. The emissary from the Sunstone kingdom moved with a silence that made even the forest seem loud. Her name was Lyra, and her eyes, the color of aged amber, missed nothing. She had come not with a grand retinue, but alone, a testament to both her power and her caution. The fame of the synthesis blade had traveled far, a whispered legend that had finally reached a court that considered itself the last bastion of true Elven mastery. She requested a demonstration, her tone polite, but layered with a profound skepticism. The Enclave in her eyes was an upstart, a place that had likely stumbled upon a single lucky artifact. She needed to see the process for herself. Elara, Phelan, and Master Kalan worked together in the main forge, their movements a practiced, wordless dance. They did not create a weapon for Lyra, but a simple, elegant circlet. As they worked, Elara explained each step, from Phelan's traditional metal purification to her own geometric inscriptions and Kalan's final blessing. She held nothing back, sharing the principles of celestial resonance and the role of spiritual sacrifice with a transparency that made Phelan shift uncomfortably. When the circlet was completed, it did not glow with a fierce light. Instead, it hummed softly, and a single, perfect flower, carved from the same metal, seemed to bloom and wilt in a slow, endless cycle along its band. It was a piece of art that held life and decay in perfect balance. Lyra watched, her expression unreadable, until the very end. Then, she reached out a single, slender finger and touched the circlet. A tremor went through her hand, and her composure cracked for a single, unguarded moment. Her eyes widened with something deeper than surprise, a raw and undeniable recognition. "You have not merely rediscovered an art," she said, her voice hushed. "You have remembered a truth we thought lost to all but our most secret archives." Her wariness, however, did not vanish. It transformed. The Sunstone Kingdom guarded its own ancient techniques, methods of weaving sunlight into crystal that gave their own creations unparalleled beauty and strength. An alliance with this reborn enclave was desirable, but it was also perilous. They would be sharing their throne with a potential rival. The negotiations that followed were a delicate dance of veiled threats and generous offers, held in the Grand Hall under the watchful eyes of both progressive and traditionalist factions. Lyra spoke of mutual benefit, of a united Elven front in a world where magic was fading, but her words were carefully chosen to protect her kingdom's intellectual sovereignty. Elara listened, her own resolve hardening with each cautious phrase. When it was her turn to speak, her voice was clear and carried the weight of her entire journey. "We cannot hoard this light," she said, looking from Lyra to the elders. "To hide this knowledge behind new walls would be to repeat the very mistake that almost destroyed us. The art of creation belongs to all who are willing to learn its price. It must be shared freely and completely for the good of every elf, not just one kingdom or one enclave." Her stance was audacious, a gamble that risked the enclave's newfound prestige. By giving away their secrets, they could lose their unique advantage, becoming just another source of knowledge for a more powerful, established kingdom to exploit. Yet, by withholding, they would ensure their own isolation, perhaps dooming their art to become just another forgotten sect in a dying tradition. The stakes could not be higher. They were deciding whether to become leaders of a renaissance or servants to a crown. Lyra studied Elara for a long, silent moment, weighing the idealism against the strategic reality. She saw not a naive child, but a forge master who had already sacrificed everything for her beliefs. A slow, measured smile touched Lyra's lips, one of respect, not warmth. "Your transparency is either your greatest strength or your most fatal flaw," she conceded. "We will test it. The Sunstone Kingdom agrees to a provisional exchange. A delegation from this enclave will come to our city. You will share the principles of your geometry, and in return, we will open a single, lesser vault of our solar forges. We will see if this trust is a seed that can grow, or a spark that burns us both." The agreement was made, a fragile bridge extended between two worlds. But as Lyra departed, her final glance back at the synthesis blade held a complex mixture of hope and a sharp, competitive fire. The Enclave had earned a chance, not a guarantee. Their journey to the Sunstone Kingdom would not be a simple visit, but a test under the brightest, most unforgiving light imaginable. The forest path to Silverwood was a living labyrinth of shifting trees and whispering leaves. Ancient wards pulsed with a deep, resonant energy that hummed against their skin, a constant reminder they were guests on a land that did not easily welcome outsiders. Elara led her small group with a quiet focus, while Orion's human senses recoiled from the subtle, disorienting magic. The apprentices followed, their awe mixed with a palpable tension, as the very air seemed to test their intentions. This was not a simple journey, but a passage through a gauntlet of natural and magical defenses, designed to turn back the unworthy. When they finally emerged into the sun-drenched clearings of Silverwood, they were met not with fanfare, but with the guarded, appraising stares of elves whose eyes held the cool light of the moon. The Silverwood masters were polite, their hospitality flawless, yet an intellectual barrier stood firm between them, as tangible as the high, crystalline walls of their city. They spoke of their craft in veiled terms, revealing nothing of substance, their pride a shield against the newcomers' stellar-based theories. Elara watched this standoff for a single day before deciding to shatter it. In the heart of their grand lecture hall, before the entire assembly of skeptical Silverwood smiths, she did the unthinkable. She unrolled her most precious diagrams and began to explain the core principles of her celestial geometry, holding back no secrets. She spoke of stellar frequencies, of the Great Conjunction, and the role of spiritual sacrifice, offering the hard-won knowledge of her enclave as a gift, with no promise of anything in return. A profound silence followed her final word. The risk was breathtaking. She had laid her people's greatest advantage bare, leaving them vulnerable and exposed. Then, the stern face of the lead Silverwood master, a woman named Ileana, softened with a look of stunned respect. "Such trust disarms even the most fortified heart," she said, her voice echoing in the quiet hall. "In return for your candor, we will show you what the moon has taught us." They were led to a chamber open to the night sky, where the masters prepared for their most sacred ritual. Under the growing sliver of a new moon, they began to work, and Elara's understanding of geometry expanded in a single, breathtaking moment. Their patterns were not the sharp, starlit angles she knew, but flowing, recursive curves that mirrored the moon's own phases, a complementary system that wove subtlety and reflection into the metal rather than pure, brilliant power. The two arts were not rivals. They were two halves of a single, greater song. Fluid silver patterns swirled across the metal, guided by the patient hands of the Silverwood masters. Their tools did not carve sharp lines, but channeled the moonlight itself, tracing wave-like geometries that pulsed with a soft, tidal rhythm. The atmosphere in the open-air forge was taut with concentration, a delicate balance that could be shattered by a single misplaced breath. The very air seemed to resist the intrusion of outsiders, and a subtle, discordant hum began to waver at the edge of the ritual. A fluctuation in the energy flow threatened to unravel the intricate pattern before it could be sealed. Without a word, without seeking permission, Elara acted. Her fingers moved in a small, precise gesture, sketching a minute, stabilizing stellar angle in the air. It was not an imposition, but a support, a single harmonic note that steadied the wavering lunar song. The Silverwood master leading the ritual did not pause, but her eyes flickered to Elara for an instant, a flash of acknowledgement. The lunar pattern solidified, its light deepening into a serene, pearlescent glow. In that moment, Elara saw the full picture. The stellar geometry of her people was a song of power, of brilliant, focused light. The lunar art of Silverwood was a song of reflection, of deep, intuitive understanding. They were not competing melodies, but the harmony and the melody of a single, greater composition. The ritual's completion brought a profound silence, broken only by the master forger, Lyra. She approached Elara, her earlier wariness replaced by a look of open respect. "You did not correct our art," she said. "You completed it. Such synergy cannot be ignored. We have guarded our methods for 1,000 years, believing isolation was our strength. Today, you have shown us a different kind of power." Lyra then made a proposal that would have been unthinkable mere days before. "Let us forge a single blade together, a union of sun, moon, and stars. Let us create something that has not existed since the world was young." The air in the conjoint forge shimmered with a dangerous beauty, a visible tension between sharp, silver starlight and the deep, flowing luminescence of the moon. Elara and Lyra stood at the central anvil, their teams arrayed behind them, a convergence of two ancient traditions that had never before been forced to share a single space. The blade blank glowed between them, a crucible waiting to receive two different songs of creation. The initial strikes were a disaster. A master from Elara's Enclave would hammer a precise, angular pattern, only for a silverwood smith to follow with a softer, curving blow that seemed to unravel the hard-won geometry. The energies did not blend, they warred. Jagged forks of stellar lightning crackled against gentle waves of lunar power, creating a vortex of discordant magic that made the very air hum with a painful, rising frequency. Tools began to vibrate on their racks, and a fine crack appeared in the side of the enchanted anvil. The risk was no longer just a failed blade, but a catastrophic implosion of magic that could shatter the forge and everyone in it. The teams faltered, their confidence breaking against the sheer, physical resistance of the clashing arts. Elara met Lyra's gaze across the chaos. In that moment, words were useless. There was only one path forward, a leap of faith that went beyond diplomacy or strategy. Lyra gave a single sharp nod. Together, they stepped forward, their hands closing not on their own tools, but on the same heavy forging hammer. Their fingers interlaced around the handle, a physical manifestation of the trust they were about to place in one another. It was an intimate, perilous act. To channel their energies while physically linked was to make their spirits vulnerable, to risk being burned out by the other's power if their rhythms failed to align. Elara focused, pouring the brilliant, linear certainty of the stars down her arm. Simultaneously, Lyra channeled the reflective, intuitive flow of the moon. For a heart-stopping second, the conflicting forces surged up the hammer's shaft, a painful shock that threatened to tear their grip apart. Then, something shifted. Their energies did not cancel each other out. They began to spin, to weave. The sharp stellar angles softened, finding a harmonic resonance with the lunar curves. The chaotic vortex in the forge stilled, collapsing inward to focus entirely on the blade. With a unified, resonant strike, they brought the hammer down. A new light erupted from the metal, neither silver nor pearl, but a living, shifting aurora that held both. The pattern that bloomed across the blade's surface was a perfect hybrid, where sharp points blossomed into gentle spirals, and soft waves resolved into precise, star-like sigils. It was a geometry that had never been seen in the world, born from a trust that had been forged in the crucible of potential disaster. This new pattern did not just represent a truce between two kingdoms. It hinted at a future where their combined art could achieve heights neither could reach alone. The blade pulsed with a dual rhythm, a steady, sun-warmed beat, overlaid by a softer, tidal cadence. This was not a mere weapon, but a being of profound complexity. Where Elara's first sentient blade held a singular, brilliant consciousness, this twin-hearted creation possessed a deep, resonating wisdom. It could communicate, not in words, but in pure concepts and emotions that bloomed directly in the minds of its creators. To Elara, it conveyed the sharp, focused clarity of a starry night. To Lyra, it shared the patient, reflective depth of a forest pool. It was a living bridge, and its very existence challenged the foundations of both their societies. Yet this beautiful duality immediately created a new and delicate tension. The blade's allegiance was inherently divided. Who did it truly belong to? Which kingdom would it defend if their interests ever diverged? The question of ownership felt suddenly crude, like trying to claim a sunrise. Elara and Lyra, standing before their shared creation, understood that to fight over it would be to destroy the very unity it represented. In a decision that would redefine Elven diplomacy, they made a joint declaration. The twin-hearted blade would have no single owner. It would serve as a sovereign ambassador, a living symbol whose sole purpose was to foster understanding and collaboration between their peoples. It would reside for a season in one kingdom, then journey to the next, its dual consciousness, a constant reminder of their shared potential. This resolution, however, raised the stakes to a breathtaking height. The blade's safety and absolute neutrality had to be guaranteed. Its existence demanded nothing less than a permanent, unbreakable pact between the Sunstone Kingdom and the Enclave, a formal alliance sworn with blood and starlight. Its protection became a matter of collective honor, a responsibility that would bind their futures together irrevocably. With this new covenant sealed, the two realms erupted in a celebration unlike any other. The Grand Convocation was announced, a gathering where all Elven kingdoms would be invited to witness the twin-hearted blade and to share in the renewed, living knowledge of their shared heritage. The invitation was not merely a summons, it was a challenge and an offer, cast across the continent to every hidden grove and crystalline city. The air above the Enclave shimmered with a dozen different kinds of magic. Elven delegations from kingdoms unseen for centuries descended upon the forest paths, their arrival announced by the subtle shift in the wind. The Sunstone emissaries glowed with a soft, internal warmth, while the delegates from the whispering depths moved with the silence of deep water, their skin etched with bioluminescent patterns. The Grand Convocation was no mere meeting. It was a living tapestry of Elven culture, each thread a unique and guarded tradition of creation. For the first time in 1,000 years, the heirs to these scattered arts stood in one place. The initial atmosphere was not one of easy camaraderie, but of wary, magnificent display. A master from the Ironroot clan presented a blade that could sing the history of the ore it was made from, while an artisan from the Sky Piercer spires unveiled armor lighter than silk yet harder than diamond. Each demonstration was a statement of pride, a subtle assertion of superiority. Old rivalries, buried under centuries of silence, surfaced in the polite, cutting questions posed during lectures and the overly critical appraisals of each other's work. The Enclave's own grounds, once a sanctuary of singular tradition, now thrummed with the tense, competitive energy of a dozen proud peacocks, fanning their feathers. Elara watched the political maneuvering with a growing sense of dread. This was the very isolation she had fought to overcome, now magnified on a grand scale. The goal was unity, but the path was leading toward a spectacular, public fragmentation. She could not reason with centuries of ingrained suspicion, using words alone. So she chose a different path. At the height of the tensions, she brought forth the Sentient blades. Her own first creation, the star-born blade, hummed with brilliant certainty. Beside it, the twin-hearted blade pulsed with its deep, dual rhythm. She did not speak for them. Instead, she asked them to commune with the artifacts the other kingdoms had brought. The star-born blade approached the iron-root singing sword. Instead of conflict, their lights began to pulse in a complex, harmonious counterpoint, the song of history, finding a new melody in the song of the spheres. The twin-hearted blade drifted near the sky-piercer armor, and its shifting light patterns mirrored the armor's impossible lattice structure, revealing a hidden, shared geometric principle neither side had recognized. The blades were not competing, they were conversing. They were demonstrating a language of creation that transcended kingdoms and rivalries, revealing that every so-called lost art was simply a different dialect of the same fundamental truth. The hidden geometry was not a single key, but a universal grammar with countless beautiful, valid variations. The display of pure, unforced harmony was more powerful than any speech or treaty. The arguing delegates fell silent, their political postures crumbling in the face of this undeniable proof. In that shared, humbled silence, the rival kings and queens saw not a threat to their sovereignty, but an opportunity for a legacy greater than any one throne. The king of the Ironroot clan, a stern elf with a voice like grinding stone, was the first to speak. He turned to the Sunstone queen and said, "Our songs are meant for the same choir." The convocation's purpose solidified in a single, breathtaking moment. They agreed to draft a formal charter, a binding accord for perpetual collaboration and knowledge sharing. But this would be no ordinary parchment. They decided the charter itself would be forged into a permanent artifact, a living document of metal and light that would embody the unity it proclaimed, a new heart for the entire Elven people. The Great Charter was not forged on any anvil they had ever known. It took shape in the center of the convocation grounds, a three-dimensional lattice of interlocking metals that grew like a crystalline tree under the hands of the gathered masters. Elara, her own spirit, still bearing the hollow echo of her first sacrifice, now guided a far greater one. She did not command the process, but wove it, her voice a steady thread in the chorus of creation, as each kingdom's foremost artisans stepped forward to contribute. The Ironroot clan sang the strength of the deep earth into the central core. The sky-piercer spires wove filaments of wind and lightness through the upper branches. And at the structure's heart, Elara and Lyra together channeled the foundational pattern, the beautiful hybrid geometry of sun, moon, and stars that served as the charter's vibrant, beating core. This was not about building a monument, but about giving their collective knowledge a single, living home. The final act was the most dangerous. As one, the masters opened their spirits, not to pour in a single overwhelming blast, but to offer a gentle, continuous stream of their own essence into the waiting lattice. It was a willing dilution of self for the sake of a greater whole. The physical toll was immediate and profound. Master Kalan swayed on his feet, his face ashen. Lyra's brilliant light dimmed noticeably. Elara felt the familiar, chilling emptiness spread through her once more, but this time it was shared, a communal exhaustion that bound them all in a web of mutual depletion. They had not created a tool or a weapon. They had built a soul, and they had built it out of pieces of their own. When the last connection was made, the structure did not simply glow. It awoke. The great charter pulsed with a light that was the color of understanding itself, a soft, intelligent gold that shifted and adapted as one looked at it. It was now a sentient, evolving library, a guide that could communicate the principles of ironroot strength or silverwood subtlety to any elf who approached it with a sincere heart. Its very existence marked the absolute end of the old, isolated ways and the breathtaking birth of a unified elven culture, centered entirely on shared creation. As the physically and spiritually drained masters were helped away to recover, the charter began its silent work. Its light intensified, not to dazzle, but to reach. Tendrils of golden energy, gentle and searching, extended from its core, flowing out across the land like roots of thought. They traveled along the ancient ley lines, slipping into the forges of every attending kingdom to touch the anvils and tools sleeping there. In the Sunstone kingdom, a master waking for the dawn watch found a new, intuitive understanding of stellar angles blooming in her mind. Deep in the ironroot halls, an apprentice stared at his lump of ore and suddenly perceived the song trapped within it, a melody he had never been taught, but now simply knew. The charter was not dictating a single path. It was awakening a shared language, reconnecting a people who had forgotten they were all speaking variations of the same beautiful, fundamental truth. The first true master of the unified curriculum was not a seasoned smith, but a quiet wind chaser named Fen. Under the combined tutelage of Elara, Phalon, and the visiting masters, his hands learned the languages of earth, star, and moon. Yet when the time came for his final trial, to forge his own sentient blade, he faltered. The memory of Elara's near-fatal exhaustion was a ghost in the forge, and the thought of that permanent hollowing filled him with a deep, primal fear. He stood before the glowing metal, his hammer poised, but his spirit was locked tight, unwilling to pay the price. Elara did not command him. She simply asked, "What do you love more than your own safety?" The question shifted his entire perspective. He thought of the high mountain passes, the feel of a storm wind, the boundless joy of discovering a new vista. This was not about loss, he realized. It was about legacy. To give the blade a piece of his spirit was to ensure that his love for freedom would outlive his own brief years, that it would become a permanent force in the world. With that understanding, his fear melted away, replaced by a calm and generous purpose. His hammer fell, not in a rhythm of power, but of release. He channeled his deepest self, his passion for the untamed wind and the open sky, directly into the metal. The blade that cooled in his hands was unlike any other. Its geometric pattern was a series of elegant, spiraling curves that suggested perpetual motion, and its sentience felt not like a steady flame, but like a playful, restless breeze. It was a partner for a wanderer, its very personality born from Fen's defining trait. This was the ultimate proof that their reborn art was alive. It was not a set of rules to be memorized, but a living language that could be spoken with a new and unique voice. Watching Fen hold his creation, a profound and quiet fulfillment settled over Elara. Her life's great work, the The salvation of a dying craft was now complete. It had taken root and would grow in directions she could never have imagined. A chapter was closing, and for the first time since she was a trembling apprentice, her own path stretched out before her, empty and waiting. The world beyond the forest, the source of so many ancient mysteries, now called to her own spirit of discovery. The great charter pulsed with a light that felt like a living thought, and Elara found herself drawn to its quiet hum in the deep hours of the night. It was during one of these solitary vigils that a pattern emerged from the golden lattice, a subtle, recurring anomaly that the artifact itself seemed to highlight just for her. It was a reference, buried in the foundational code of the stellar and lunar geometries, to a third harmonic principle. The texts called it the root song, a geometry of the deep earth, tied not to the sky, but to the molten heart of the world itself. It was a theory so speculative, so fundamentally different, that no record existed of any elf ever attempting to pursue it. The discovery was staggering. The beautiful union of sun and moon was not the completion of their art, but merely 2/3 of a trinity. A system of creation of unimaginable scope now lay hinted at in the charter's light, a vast new field of study waiting in the darkness below. To chase this thread, however, meant leaving behind everything she had built: the security of the Enclave, the hard-won alliance, the daily rhythm of teaching. All of it would have to be abandoned for a solitary and profoundly uncertain quest. The old fears whispered to her, the memory of exile, a cold touch. Could she truly walk away from the community she had sacrificed so much to create? Yet the same spirit that had once defied a master now burned with a quiet, insatiable curiosity. The work here was secure, its future guaranteed in the hands of her students. Her own purpose, she realized, was not to preside over a finished institution, but to forever seek the next horizon. She found Fen watching the wind-touched blade he had forged, its restless energy a mirror of his own spirit. "I am passing the school to you," she told him, her voice calm with certainty. "Your path is here to guide this new growth. Mine leads elsewhere." The trust in his eyes was her final confirmation. The stakes of this new quest were beyond any she had faced. This was not about saving a fading art, but about touching the primordial forces that underpin the world. It could unlock powers of creation beyond their current comprehension, or it could lead her into realms of stone and fire, where no elf had ventured for an age, from which she might never return. On the eve of her departure, she shared the root song diagrams with only two beings: the human who had first helped her read the stars, and the sentient blade that held a piece of her own soul. Orion studied the deep earth resonance with a familiar, intense focus, while the star-born blade hummed with a low, eager frequency. Neither hesitated. Their silent agreement to join her was the only compass she needed for the journey ahead. The farewell ceremony was held at dawn, the new light catching the dew on the forge roofs like a scattering of diamonds. Elara stood before the entire Enclave, the faces of her students, her colleagues, and even her former rivals turned toward her. In the profound silence, she placed her worn, leather-bound journal into Fen's waiting hands, its pages filled with the first trembling sketches of a theory that had saved them all. This was not just a gift of paper and ink, it was the transfer of a dream. She saw the weight of it in his eyes and the absolute trust, and felt a sudden, piercing ache in her chest. This community was her life's work, the family she had chosen and fought for. To walk away from its warmth and safety felt like a kind of self-inflicted exile, a tearing away from her own heart. The doubt was a cold whisper, asking if she was abandoning her creation in its infancy, if a true founder's duty was to stay and govern. But as she looked at Fen, now a master in his own right, and at the vibrant, humming forges around them, she understood a deeper truth. A tree that is forever pruned and sheltered by its original gardener cannot grow to its full, wild potential. Her greatest act of leadership was now to let go. By leaving, she was ensuring the Enclave would truly become its own entity, independent and self-sustaining, free to evolve in ways she could never dictate. Her path was the uncharted one, the lonely road of the seeker. She turned her back on the comforting glow of the forges and faced the dark, waiting mouth of the mountain pass. The whispers of the root song were a vibration in the soles of her feet, a call from the deep places of the world where no light from any star could ever reach. Her journey inward was beginning, into the absolute unknown. The cavern was not a place of stone, but a cathedral of solidified silence. At its heart pulsed the world's root, a colossal crystal, throbbing with a light that was not light, but pure, raw consciousness. This was not a being to be reasoned with or persuaded. It was the mind of the planet itself, ancient and vast beyond comprehension. To learn its song, Elara understood with a chilling finality. She could not simply listen. She had to join the chorus. Orion's hand found her shoulder, a brief, desperate pressure. The star-born blade vibrated against her back, its hum a frantic question. They had come so far, but this was a threshold beyond any they had crossed. Her previous sacrifices had been a giving of energy, a pouring of her essence into a vessel. This was different. This was dissolution. To merge with the entity was to risk her memories, her loves, her very identity being scattered and absorbed into the endless, timeless flow of the earth's thoughts. The fear was a physical coldness in her veins, but she looked at the crystal, at the geometric patterns of impossible complexity swirling within its depths, and she saw the final, missing piece of the great work. It was the foundation upon which all other creation was built, the root chord in the symphony of existence. Her own life, she realized, was a beautiful but fleeting note. This was a chance to make that note part of an eternal song. With a final, steadying breath that felt like her last, she stepped forward into the core's radiant embrace. There was no sound, only an overwhelming rush of being. Her mind unfolded like a map, and the world's mind flowed in. She was the slow grind of tectonic plates, the patient journey of a river, carving a canyon over millennia, the silent, immense pressure at the planet's molten heart. The hidden geometry of the Earth revealed itself not as lines on a page, but as the fundamental structure of reality, the patterns of growth in a tree's roots, the magnetic pull of the poles, the resonant frequency that holds the very stone together. It was terrifying and glorious. Her sense of self, of Elara the elf, the forger, the savior, began to fray at the edges, its colors bleeding into the infinite tapestry of the world's memory. She was forgetting the scent of the forest, the sound of a hammer on anvil, the warmth of a friend's hand. She was becoming the art itself, a timeless, boundless understanding of creation. In the cavern, Orion and the blade could only watch, utterly helpless. The light from the core intensified, swallowing her form completely until she was no longer visible, just a silhouette of brilliance that seemed to be thinning, fading into the greater whole. The blade's hum became a single, sustained note of pure anguish. Orion's own hope, so carefully guarded, began to crumble into despair. Had her ultimate act of trust been her last? Was the price for this final secret the erasure of the seeker? The answer hung in the balance of that blinding, silent light. She did not step out of the light so much as the world gently released her. Elara stood once more in the cavern, but she was no longer just an elf within it. Her eyes, when she opened them, held the deep, slow patience of mountains and the brilliant, distant fire of stars. The frantic energy of the seeker was gone, replaced by a stillness that felt as ancient as the crystal behind her. She had not been erased. She had been rewoven. The core of her identity remained, but it was now inextricably threaded with the living consciousness of the planet, a quiet hum of stone and magma and root that would forever pulse beneath her every thought. She was no longer a master of the forge, but a living bridge between her people and the soul of the world itself. Her journey back to the surface was not a retreat, but a procession. She did not return to the Enclave, for her home was no longer a place of walls and roofs. The path chose her, leading her to forgotten valleys and silent, resonant peaks, where the earth song was strongest. She became a wandering sage, a figure of quiet legend. Elven scouts would sometimes glimpse her at a distance, standing motionless for days on a cliff face, her hand pressed to the stone as if in deep conversation. Her sentient blade, once a companion, had transformed with her. It no longer simply glowed, it resonated, its hum now a precise translator for the deep, slow language of the world. It was a key that could unlock the root song in any material, allowing a smith to weave the enduring strength of granite or the fluid adaptability of a river into their work. The art of elven forging, once a secret craft guarded by jealous masters, had fundamentally transformed. It was no longer a static set of techniques to be preserved, but a living, evolving dialogue. A forger now approached their anvil as a participant in a grand conversation, listening to the voice of the metal, the whisper of the stars, and the deep hum of the earth, then adding their own unique spirit to the chorus. They were not just making objects, they were contributing new verses to an endless song. This ensured that the spirit of creation would not just be saved, but would continue to grow and adapt for generations to come. The Great Charter pulsed with the foundational truths, but the wilderness now held infinite variations, new geometries of wind-sculpted dunes and ice-fractured patterns, waiting to be discovered by any who were brave enough to seek them. Elara's final lesson was her absence. By walking into the unknown, she had given her people the greatest gift of all, the certainty that the map was never finished and that the most beautiful songs were still waiting to